Hello and welcome to the Capitol Report. I'm your host, Steve Lance, and here's a look at some of the stories we have for you today. With thousands of Haitian illegals flocking to the U.S. southern border, the Biden administration is being forced to act. We speak to a Texas congressman to find out more. A government shutdown and an economic recession are right around the corner, so Congress has no choice but to fund the government and to raise the debt ceiling. But how this is going to happen is the sticking point for Democrats and Republicans. And gun violence continues to rise. 2021 is on track to be the worst year for gun violence in decades. The Del Rio area in Texas has become the epicenter of the Biden administration's border crisis. The photos and videos of the thousands of illegal immigrants gathering there is a symbolic image of the 1.3 million people who've been apprehended at the border this year.
Get it under control. Get it under control, or you have it under control. We will get it under control.
Biden said that twice in a response to questions regarding the border crisis. More than 6,000 Haitians and other illegal aliens had been removed from an encampment in Del Rio, Texas. The DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas visited Del Rio Monday to see the camp firsthand. During a Senate hearing on Tuesday, the DHS Secretary was pressed about the Biden administration's response to the crisis.
You have repeatedly stated that our borders are not open, that they're closed. Do you honestly believe that our borders are closed?
Senator, I do.
Senator Ron Johnson said at the hearing that there have been 1.3 million apprehensions in 2021 and over 6,700 per day for the last 2 months. The situation in Del Rio, Texas has garnered national attention over recent days, with the shocking aerial footage of the thousands of illegal aliens gathering under a bridge there. The Biden administration has started to deport small demographics of these people and is letting a large number of others into the country. We have seen reports of some that are being targeted for deportation, fleeing over to the other side of the border to Mexico to presumably wait it out until the pressure dies down or to find another entry point. We spoke to Texas Congressman Jodey Arrington on Capitol Hill to get his take on this complicated situation. Take a look. Now, Congressman, I just want to ask you about the border crisis. It's been an ongoing issue, spiraling out of control. It's taking a back seat as of late, but now it's back on the radar with the recent issue of thousands of Haitians crossing the ocean to Mexico and then making their way to the U.S.-Mexico border. Can you tell me what exactly is it that makes this situation so unique?
Well, it's an unprecedented time with record numbers of folks crossing our border illegally, but it's not just smuggling of people. And by the way, we should note that they're all being smuggled because the drug cartels are in total control of the border, not our government, not the government of Mexico. And this particular group of Haitians, I think, have sort of settled in Central and in some cases South America since the earthquake. And now we're seeing tens of thousands moving to cross the Mexico-U.S. border to come to our country. And this administration's response has been, let's load them up on planes and take them back to Haiti. Well, or to Haiti. And my question is, why are they turning this group away, but they're not enforcing Title 42, which is the public health emergency measure that Trump used to basically stop people from crossing illegally? Why don't they enforce that fully on everybody so that the message is clear? If you come to this country, you have to go through the legal channels.
Now, I just want to ask you, a lot of times when you hear your colleagues on the other side making the argument that a lot of these migrants are fleeing tyranny or suppression, now you see these Haitian migrants, they're clearly economic migrants. How does this make the situation different, and what do you have to say to that?
Well, when people seek asylum, even in the current broken immigration system and the laws on the books, it has to be fear of being persecuted by their government. There are lots of folks who are experiencing economic despair. Quite frankly, you've got people experiencing despair in this country because of the inflationary effects of the spending and the lack of people being motivated to work because we're paying them to stay on the sideline. This president, his open border policies have created a free-for-all at the border. It is lawlessness, complete lawlessness. Texans are paying tens of billions of dollars, and Americans are paying over $100 billion to provide for the public safety, the education, the health care, and we've turned our Border Patrol into a social service program. So this is a disaster that's hard to really appreciate unless you've been to the border, but the numbers, I mean, 300% increase month over month, every month for the last several months.
The Biden administration has openly admitted that this is a crisis. From your perspective, what can they do to stop it?
If you stop the magnets of providing social services or jobs for people who are here illegally, you wouldn't have people come. You'd only have those drug traffickers. You wouldn't have the flood of people who are coming probably for a better life for their family. I don't doubt that the vast majority probably are coming with that motive, but it doesn't matter. We have a legal process. Millions wait in line for years. 1 million people approximately are given legal status to be in our country. And that whole process is undermined, and those folks are cheated because they followed the rules in the law, and these other folks haven't. So unless they enforce the laws, secure the border, turn off the magnets, close the loopholes, we are going to continue to get what we're getting, which is a disaster and chaos at our border, and the American people, who are our primary responsibility here, are suffering with a public health threat and a threat to their safety and security.
President Biden wants to nearly double the number of refugees admitted to the United States. According to a statement from the State Department, the Biden administration is seeking to lift the refugee cap to 125,000 starting on October 1st. The State Department is consulting with the Department of Homeland Security and Congress to lift the cap. Former President Donald Trump cut the refugee cap to 15,000, the lowest level since the refugee program was created in 1980. Biden promised to reverse course after he took office. A government shutdown and an economic recession are right around the corner. To address this, congressional leadership wants to fund the government and suspend the national debt in one shot. But economists warn that the debt ceiling increase needs to have limits. Otherwise, it's the same as writing a blank check for the government. NTD's Melina Wisecup has more details from Capitol Hill. So, Melina, what's the latest on Congress's attempt this week to work out some of these issues?
Steve, last night the House did pass that government funding bill along with the measure to suspend the debt ceiling. Now, funding the government is necessary in order to avoid a government shutdown, but House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Leader Chuck Schumer have included in this government funding bill a measure to suspend the debt ceiling until December of next year. Now, just because it passed the Democratic-controlled House, that doesn't mean it's actually highly unlikely that it will pass the Senate because they're lacking those 10 Republican votes needed in order to pass it. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell came out today and expressed that the debt ceiling must be raised, but he still says Republicans are planning to vote against it, and he was joined by a group of Republicans today to explain why.
They don't just want to raise the debt ceiling in the way that it was traditionally done, where you raise it by a few $100 billion or $1 trillion or some certain number. They want to suspend it. They want to suspend it for the rest of this year and basically for all of next year.
Now, Republicans are really pushing Democrats to raise the debt ceiling on their own because they can do that through a budgetary process without any Republican votes. But Democrats are saying that Republicans should still have to bear some of the burden of raising the debt ceiling because some of that debt that we have now, the $28 trillion of debt, some of that was accrued under the Trump administration through bills that Republicans did help pass. But Republicans are pushing back against this, saying that they shouldn't have to bear the burden of raising the debt ceiling, especially at a time when Democrats are trying to pass another multi-trillion-dollar package meant for social welfare programs and clean energy project initiatives. This is causing fury among Democrats because this is a real issue that has to be dealt with immediately. President Biden has already warned states that if Congress doesn't move quickly to raise the debt ceiling, federally funded programs will be cut off, such as Medicaid, WIC for mothers, disaster relief, education programs, and more will be affected if this debt ceiling is not raised.
Our country could actually be plunged into recession, laying off millions.
Now, like Senator Schumer just pointed out, raising the debt ceiling is necessary in order to avoid an economic recession. But some conservative economists and what Republicans are arguing is that raising the debt ceiling without a limit comes with consequences.
Republican Congress or Democrat Congress choosing to borrow infinite amounts of money from our future generations, it's imprudent. This is akin to, let's say you have a credit card and you have a $10,000 credit limit. This is akin to the credit card company telling you, hey, there's no cap at all. You want to borrow $100,000, you want to borrow $1 million, go for it.
So on the issue of the debt ceiling, we know the national debt grew from $5 trillion to $28 trillion in just one generation. Where is the majority of that money being spent, and is there any way to solve this debt ceiling crisis in the long term?
Well, Steve, some look to the military because the U.S. does have a powerful military. Some say that a lot of this national debt was accrued through funding the military, but there's also a large amount of this money that has been spent on social welfare programs, which have over the years just continuously expanded. And social welfare is something that the government must continuously funnel money in order to fund. Now, as far as a way to solve it, economists say the only answer is to make sure that we set a limit on the debt and make sure that we can pay off that debt. Steve?
Thanks for that, Melina. The gun violence this year so far is surpassing the highest levels of 2020. 2021 is on track to be the worst year for gun violence in decades. According to the Gun Violence Archive, more than 14,000 Americans died from gun violence from January 1st till September 15th this year. That's about a 10% increase from the same time last year. In Chicago, 56 people were shot and 9 died over the weekend. This year, kids shot in Chicago alone is more than all kids who have died from COVID nationwide. Americans bought 23 million firearms last year, a record number. Over 8 million of them were new gun owners. Gun sales now are down a bit compared to 2020, but still remain higher than previous years. A U.S. intelligence officer suffered from what he believes is HAVANA syndrome while traveling with CIA Director William Burns in India earlier in the month. The CIA declined to comment on the officer's case, but in a statement, Burns has said that he has made it a top priority to ensure officers get the care they need and that the agency get to the bottom of this. HAVANA syndrome is a series of symptoms linked to suspected directed energy attacks. These symptoms first started to surface among U.S. personnel working in the United States Embassy in Cuba in 2016, hence the name HAVANA syndrome. There are at least 200 cases under investigation, half of them involving intelligence personnel. The recent incident occurred just a few weeks after 2 possible cases of HAVANA syndrome delayed Vice President Kamala Harris's trip from Singapore to Vietnam. In his first speech to the United Nations, President Biden said the U.S. is willing to work with any nation, even where there is severe disagreement. But Congressman Mike Gallagher tells NTD the U.S. is already in the early stages of a Cold War with China. Another vaccinated congressman tests positive for COVID this week. More than 10 other House and Senate lawmakers have contracted the virus after receiving both doses of the vaccine. And the events of January 6th continue to be a point of contention among Democrats and Republicans. There was a lot of fanfare in the media for an event in front of the Capitol last weekend called Justice for J6. Who were the people attending the rally, and what was their message? President Joe Biden addressed the United Nations General Assembly on Tuesday, saying Washington is willing to work with any nation, even where there are severe differences.
The United States is ready to work with any nation that steps up and pursues peaceful resolution to shared challenges, even if we have intense disagreements in other areas.
Biden didn't mention China specifically, but he acknowledged rising tensions between the two nations. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres called on the two countries to repair the relationship and avoid a new Cold War.
We are not seeking a new Cold War or a world divided into rigid blocks.
However, Congressman Mike Gallagher told NTD he believes the new Cold War is already happening.
I mean, it's my view that we are in the early stages of a new Cold War with China. What makes it different than the old Cold War is, one, we're thoroughly economically entangled with China, and I think our big lesson learned from the pandemic is that we can't be critically dependent on a hostile foreign adversary for the manufacturing of pharmaceuticals, basic critical technology, and so
he warned Wall Street and Hollywood about profiting from China.
Because in doing that, you're making a profit off slave labor.
Another difference from the old Cold War Gallagher mentioned is the ideological division within the United States, which is being exploited by the Chinese Communist Party.
Because we have a crazy woke ideology that's teaching a whole generation of Americans that America is an evil racist hellscape that must constantly apologize for its past sins and be scared of its own shadow. That's unacceptable. And the Chinese Communist Party officials are co-opting that narrative of the far left so that they can lecture our officials when they sit across from them in Alaska and say, you can't criticize us about Tiananmen or Xinjiang because America's evil. You're just as bad as us. That's unacceptable. This is the greatest country in the history of the world, and until we recognize that fact and understand it, we're going to be playing catch-up in this new Cold War for a long time.
U.S. Air Force Secretary Frank Kendall warned about China's military ambitions, especially threats from space. Kendall said that China has sped up its pace in modernizing its military. Concerned about the direction the CCP's military is going, he said Beijing is looking to develop silo-based intercontinental ballistic missiles and satellite-guided munitions to hit targets on Earth and in space. Kendall became the Secretary of the Air Force in July. When being asked about his top priorities as the Secretary, he said he had three: China, China, and China.
Which is, of course, China.
Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser announced all teachers, school personnel, and early child care workers in the district must be fully vaccinated. The mayor's order starts on November 1st. It does allow exemptions for religious or medical reasons, but rules out the option for public school teachers and daycare professionals to get regular testing for the virus.
This applies to D.C. public schools, public charter schools, private schools, parochial schools, and child care facilities regulated by OSCE. And this does not include a testing out provision.
City Administrator Kevin Donahue says that 475 people within the D.C. government have requested religious exemptions. 88% of those requests are coming from D.C. Fire and EMS. Congressman Tim Ryan from Ohio tested positive for COVID earlier this week. Ryan has been vaccinated. More than 10 other House and Senate lawmakers also contracted the virus after receiving both doses of the vaccine. So far, over 80 representatives and senators have been diagnosed with COVID. One of them has died from the virus. You may have heard this past weekend there was a rally at the Capitol calling attention to the treatment and due process, or lack thereof, for some of those who have been detained following the events on January 6th. Leading up to the event, the media painted a grim picture of domestic terrorists and right-wing extremists who would be attending the event. The fencing around the Capitol that went up following the breach was reinstalled, and there was manufactured anticipation that something bad was to come. I was covering the event on Saturday, and the atmosphere was almost surreal. You could feel the overwhelming police presence in the area, and our studios happened to be just across from the Capitol, which gave us a unique perspective and access to this event. You can see on the rooftops here that there were special police units spotting with binoculars and communicating with the units on the ground. From what we could tell, much of the communications were actually focused on the agitators who were trying to stir trouble at the event, and the plainclothes and uniformed police presence on the ground was also overwhelming. Something that was quite obvious to us was the presence of these counter-protesters, whether they be Antifa or BLM, looking to incite trouble. It's already come out that these types of instigators were present on January 6th. You had a man named John Sullivan, a Black Lives Matter supporter, who was seen on video inciting the crowd. This person, John Sullivan, is still facing 8 charges for his involvement on January 6th. Some of the people I spoke with attending the event were actually there on the day of January 6th. They were not involved in the Capitol breach, and from what they told me, the vast majority of people on that day were peaceful.
People were frustrated about the election disintegrity, but people were so nice, and they were just such patriots. They were here because their voices weren't being heard, and this was the last remedy they had. And so when we went, of course, there's things called agent provocateurs, agitators, right? And so they start, and a lot of them wearing MAGA hats. You know, they were undercover.
Now, from what I could gather, speaking with a wide range of people attending the rally on Saturday, this was a diverse group. They came together to support what they said is due process, and nobody denied the events that took place on January 6th.
Committed some crimes, rightfully so. People should, if you get in trouble, you do that, you should do the time. No one's disputing that. But when you're getting charged for misdemeanor and being treated like a domestic terrorist, that's a problem.
I don't believe in demonizing anyone. I voted Libertarian. I voted for Obama. I voted for Trump. Only because I felt he was a better man than Biden.
And if we had this, we wouldn't be here fighting about this.
Now, after concluding the event and asking all of the attendees to thank the Capitol Police and show their appreciation by thanking them upon exiting, organizer Matt Brainerd spoke with me for a brief moment.
We're going to stand up for these Americans who are being politically persecuted, who are being treated disparately. We're going to stand up for Ashley Babbitt so she gets the investigation that she deserves. We're going to demand transparency from the Capitol Police Department.
Now, from what I witnessed covering this event myself, this event was very peaceful. The police presence was definitely a help in keeping the peace. Counter-protesters and agitators were removed or kept at a distance when they became aggressive. The event organizer, Matt Brainerd, told us that he plans on having similar events in other cities and that he expects that each of those will be just as peaceful as this one was. And that's all we have for you today on the Capitol Report. Please don't forget to like and subscribe below. I'm your host, Steve Lance. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.